The elevator shouldn't have been working. Maplewood General Hospital had lost power at 11:17 p.m. A transformer failure that knocked out the entire East Wing, including the surgical suites, the ICU monitoring stations, and every overhead fluorescent light in the building. The backup generators had kicked in 9 seconds later, but 9 seconds was a long time when you were hooking a patient to a ventilator, and the low, amber glow of emergency lighting turned the third-floor corridor into something that belonged in a nightmare. Sarah Calloway had been working the overnight shift for 6 years. She knew which tiles were loose, which supply cart wheels squeaked, which nurse's station phone had a broken receiver that would give you a dial tone only if you held the cord at a 45-degree angle. She knew Maplewood the way people know old houses, by their sounds, their moods, their small betrayals. She did not know at 11:34 p.m. on a Tuesday in November that the man who collapsed in front of her in the stairwell of the East Wing was the single most dangerous person in the province of Ontario. She just saw a man bleeding out on the concrete steps. He had come through the fire door from the second floor. She heard it slam before she saw him, and the sound of it echoed up the stairwell like a gunshot. Sarah was halfway down the stairs, with a portable oxygen kit slung over her shoulder, rerouting her rounds, because the main corridor was blocked by a maintenance crew dealing with the generator switch. The man made it 4 steps before his legs stopped cooperating. He went down sideways, catching himself hard on the metal railing, then sliding until he was sitting against the wall with his legs stretched across the full width of the stairs. He was wearing a suit that cost more than her monthly rent. She registered that detail the same way you register weather, automatically, without meaning to. Dark charcoal wool, now ruined beyond salvage, the left side soaked through with something dark and wet that had already dripped down to stain the third step beneath him. His face was the color of old chalk. "Sir." Sarah dropped to her knees beside him, 2 fingers going to his neck. Pulse weak, fast. Irregular, breathing, shallow, eyes half open, the pupils uneven in the dim emergency light. "Sir, I need you to stay with me. Can you tell me your name?" His hand came up and wrapped around her wrist. His grip was shockingly strong for a man who looked like he was 30 seconds from unconscious. "No hospital," he said. The words were quiet, precise, clipped in the way of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Even bleeding on a staircase, the authority in his voice was extraordinary. "No records. There's no system. You've been shot," Sarah said. She had already found the wound, her fingers pressing through the ruined jacket. "Entry wound, left flank." She couldn't see the exit. "You need a trauma team. They're watching the trauma bay." His eyes focused on her face with visible effort. "Cameras. They have people watching the cameras." "Who does?" He didn't answer that. He said instead, "Is there somewhere you can take me that isn't on the hospital network?" "No cameras, no intake forms." Sarah looked at him. She thought about protocol, about liability, about the orientation manual that said you never, under any circumstances, moved an injured patient without a gurney and a physician's order. She thought about the fact that he was bleeding steadily onto the concrete, and she had maybe 12 minutes of useful window before the math got brutal. "There's a decommissioned treatment room on the basement level," she said. "Sub-basement. It's been off the maintenance rotation for 2 years. No cameras. The network dropped it when they did the East Wing renovation." Something in his face shifted. "Take me there." Getting him down 2 flights of stairs was the hardest physical work Sarah had done in her life, and she had once helped lift a 260-pound man off a bathroom floor alone when her backup was stuck in traffic. He was tall. She put him at 6'1", 6'2", and while he was trying to cooperate, trying to use his legs, every few steps the effort cost him more than he had, and she was taking his full weight against her shoulder. She gripped the back of his jacket collar with her free hand and the railing with the other and talked to him the entire way down. "Keep your eyes open. Talk's your name. You don't have to tell me the truth. Just say something." "Ethan," he said. "Okay. Ethan, I'm Sarah. I work nights here. I'm not going to let you die on the staircase because the paperwork would be genuinely terrible." A sound came out of him that might have been a laugh if he'd had more oxygen to spare. The sub-basement room was at the end of a hallway that smelled like old floor wax and institutional paint. The door was unlocked. Nobody bothered locking a room that didn't exist on the active floor plan, and inside was an exam table that hadn't been moved when the room was cleared. 2 locked cabinets she had keys to, because sub-basement storage fell under her supply rotation, and a single fluorescent tube that buzzed and flickered before deciding to stay on. She got him onto the table. He made no sound when she pressed him flat, which meant either his pain tolerance was extraordinary, or he was further into shock than she'd estimated. She cut the jacket and shirt away with the trauma shears from her kit and looked at what she was dealing with. The bullet had entered low on the left side, below the ribs. There was no exit wound, which meant it was still in there, which meant she was absolutely out of her depth. What she could do, what she was going to do, was pack the wound, control the bleeding, and keep him alive long enough to figure out what came next. "This is going to hurt," she told him. "Do it." She pressed the wound, packing in, and he made a sound through his teeth that she felt in her back molars. His hand found the edge of the exam table and held on with a grip that bent the metal lip. "You're doing fine," Sarah said, her voice steady the way it got steady under pressure. The professional calm that had taken her 3 years and a very bad code situation on the pediatric floor to develop. "Keep breathing. In through the nose." "You do this often?" he asked through gritted teeth. "Pack gunshot wounds in decommissioned basement rooms at midnight?" "First time, actually." She secured the packing with pressure bandage from the cabinet, her hands moving quickly. "I usually just do this with regular patients in regular rooms with a full trauma team. This is what you'd call improvising." His breathing was stabilizing slightly. The worst of the bleed was slowing. She started an IV with the supplies from the locked cabinet. The room had been a treatment room, and the cabinet still held basics that nobody had catalogued out, and ran saline to start replacing volume. "The bullet needs to come out," she said. "I know. I can't do that here. I'm a registered nurse. I'm very good at what I do, but I am not a surgeon, and there is a bullet lodged in your left flank that I cannot remove with the supplies in this room. Then keep me stable until morning." His voice was clearer now, slightly. The saline was helping. He turned his head and looked at her directly for the first time. His eyes were dark, steady, and carried the particular quality of someone who had spent a long time looking at dangerous things without flinching. "Can you do that?" Sarah looked back at him. "I can try. Are you going to tell me who shot you?" "No. Are you going to tell me who's watching the cameras?" "Also no. Helpful," she said. She pulled a stool from the corner and sat down, because her legs had started shaking and she preferred not to do that standing up. "Ethan, is that actually your name?" A pause. "Ethan Caruso." She didn't react. She had not grown up in Toronto without hearing that name. She had not worked in a hospital that served the downtown core without knowing, in the general, ambient way that people know things they're not supposed to know, that the Caruso family had a particular relationship with the medical community. Anonymous donations. Certain questions not asked. Certain charts filed differently. She had simply never expected to be alone in a basement with one of them bleeding on her exam table. "Okay," she said. "Ethan Caruso, I'm going to need you to not die, because I have a genuinely complicated shift ahead of me, and I don't have time to deal with the alternative." "Agreed," he said. And then, because blood loss and shock make people say things they would never otherwise say, "Why did you bring me here? You didn't have to." Sarah thought about that. She thought about Mara. Her younger sister, 17 years old, currently in a recovery room on the 4th floor of this same building, 3 days post-surgery on a tumor that had wrapped itself around her spinal cord, like something personal and malicious. Sarah had spent the last 2 years working doubles, skipping holidays, taking every overtime shift offered, because the gap between what provincial coverage paid and what Mara's treatment actually cost was a number that kept growing no matter how many hours she worked. She thought about what it felt like to watch someone you loved be frightened and in pain and have the only thing you could offer them be your own presence, because you had run out of everything else. "Because you were bleeding," she said, "and I'm a nurse. It's what I do." The hours moved slowly. Sarah monitored his vitals in 15-minute intervals, adjusted the IV flow, and changed the pressure bandage once when the first one saturated. She kept the fluorescent light on, and the door closed, and tried not to think about the fact that somewhere in this building there were people watching camera feeds looking for this man. Around 2 in the morning, he was alert enough to talk. "You said your sister is here," he said. Sarah looked up from the chart she was filling in by hand, on paper, because she was not entering any of this into the system. "I didn't say that. You've looked at the ceiling twice toward the east wing. You know where people are in this building." You looked northeast. Pediatric recovery is northeast. She set the pen down. Spinal tumor. She had surgery 3 days ago. She paused. The surgical team was excellent. The tumor is gone. But the follow-up treatment, the monitoring, the rehabilitation, she stopped. "How much?" His voice was quiet. "That's not your concern. It is now. You kept me alive tonight. In my world, that creates an obligation." "In my world," Sarah said, "it's called doing your job." He was quiet for a moment. "How long have you been working doubles to cover her bills?" 2 years, and before that I was saving up for a deposit on a place where we could live together after she finished school." She heard how that sounded, the dry, documentary quality of it, and felt the familiar weariness that came with telling a story that had no good parts. She was diagnosed 14 months into that, so. Ethan Caruso looked at the ceiling. Outside, somewhere above them, the hospital kept running. Monitors, carts, the distant muffled announcement from the PA system. "My people will want to know who helped me," he said. "When they find me, and they will find me, sometime tomorrow morning, they'll want to debrief you." "I'd rather not be debriefed. I understand that, but the alternative." He paused. "Sarah, the man who shot me works for a firm that has been trying to take control of certain distribution agreements my family holds. His name is Gordon Price. He had access to the hospital administration network because he has a board member in his pocket. The cameras he controls cover the main entrance, the trauma bay, the second and third floor east corridors. Not the sub-basement," she said. "Not the sub-basement." He met her eyes. "You chose well. I chose the only option that wasn't covered. That's less strategy and more luck. In my experience, luck and preparation look identical at 3 in the morning." She almost smiled. She didn't quite. Dawn came the way it does in November in Ontario. Reluctantly, grey, incrementally. The thin light began filtering through the single high window of the sub-basement room, and Ethan Caruso was still breathing, still stable, his vitals within ranges that Sarah had spent the night fighting to maintain. The bullet was still in him, which was bad, but the bleeding had controlled, which was the only good news available. At 6:47 a.m., she heard footsteps in the sub-basement hallway that were not the building settling. She was on her feet before the door opened. She picked up the surgical shears from the supply tray, which was a genuinely inadequate response to whatever was about to come through the door. But her options were limited. The door opened and a woman walked in. 40-something, dark suit that said former military or close enough to make no difference. Behind her, 2 men who had the careful, measured quality of people who were paid to notice everything. The woman looked at Sarah, then at Ethan on the table, then at the IV line and the pressure bandage and the handwritten chart on the stool. "You're the nurse," the woman said. "I'm the nurse," Sarah agreed. "My name is Iris. I work for Mr. Caruso." She looked at Ethan. "How bad? Bullet still in?" Ethan said. "She's been keeping me stable for 7 hours. Get Marchetti on the phone." Iris was already dialing. The 2 men moved into the room with a kind of practiced efficiency that suggested they had done this before in other rooms, in other cities, on other nights exactly like this one. A medical kit materialized. A phone call was made in clipped Italian. Within 40 minutes, a surgeon arrived carrying a hard case of equipment that did not come from any hospital supply chain Sarah recognized. She stayed. Nobody told her to leave, and she did not offer to. She assisted the surgeon the way she had assisted surgeons for 6 years, handing instruments, monitoring the drip, watching the vitals. And when it was over, and the bullet was out, and Ethan Caruso was sedated on a medical-grade portable stretcher that had appeared from somewhere in the back of a vehicle outside, she stood in the corner of the sub-basement room with blood on her scrubs and her hands, and felt the full weight of the night settle onto her shoulders all at once. Iris handed her a phone. "He wants to speak with you." The screen showed a video call. The man on the other end was in his 60s, silver-haired, with the kind of face that had spent decades making decisions and showed it. He looked at Sarah for a long moment without speaking. "My son tells me you kept him alive for 7 hours in a hospital basement," the man said. His voice had the same quality as Ethan's, that layered authority, the assumption of being heard. "That you asked for nothing. I'm a nurse," Sarah said. "He was a patient. He was a liability. He was bleeding in a stairwell in a building controlled by our enemies, and you chose to protect him instead of turning him over or walking away." A pause. "That is not nothing, Miss Calloway." She did not ask how he knew her name. She had spent the night figuring out that these were people who knew things. "What happens now?" she asked. "That depends on you." He reached off-screen and produced an envelope which he held up briefly before setting it back down. "Price's people know a nurse assisted Ethan last night. They don't know which nurse. They don't know your name. At the moment." He let that sit. "If they find out who you are, they will use your sister to find out what Ethan told you. They will threaten Mara to get information you don't even have." Sarah's stomach went cold. "We can protect her," he said. "We can protect both of you. But it requires a decision, and it requires it now. What kind of with us? Voluntarily. Your sister remains here, in this hospital, under care that I will personally guarantee is the finest available in this country. Her follow-up treatment, her rehabilitation, her recovery, paid, fully, without condition, without ceiling." He paused. "And you stay in our facility until my son's people have dealt the price and the board member who gave him access to this hospital's systems. And if I say no, then you go back to your shift. And in approximately 48 hours, Gordon Price people figure out which nurse was in the East Wing last night, and the decision gets made for you in a way that is considerably worse for everyone involved." Sarah looked at the phone screen. She thought about Mara, asleep 4 floors above her, not knowing any of this had happened. She thought about the number on Mara's billing statement, the one she had memorized, because she looked at it so often it had burned itself into her. She thought about the man on the exam table who had trusted her with something he had no logical reason to trust her with, and how she had spent 7 hours making sure that trust wasn't wasted. "I want to see Mara before I go," she said. "I want 5 minutes with her, in person." A pause on the other end of the call. Then, "Iris will take you." She had 10 minutes with Mara, not 5. Iris proved to be someone with a functional understanding of sisters, and she sat on the edge of her sister's recovery bed and held her hand and told her that she was going away for a little while for work, that it was fine, that she would be back. She said it with the same calm she used when Mara was 12 and scared of something and needed to believe that Sarah had it handled. Mara said, "You look terrible. Did you sleep at all? I had a long shift. You always have a long shift." Mara squeezed her hand. "You work too much." "I know," Sarah said. "Things are going to be better. I mean that." She left the room before she stopped meaning it. The Caruso family's safe house was in a residential neighborhood in North York that looked entirely like every other residential street in North York. Semi-detached houses, clean driveways, the faint smell of someone's breakfast. The inside was a different matter. Reinforced everything, cameras at every angle, a medical suite on the 2nd floor that was better equipped than half the hospitals Sarah had done her placements in. She was given a room with a window that looked onto a small backyard with a spruce tree that had started dropping its needles for the season. She was not locked in. Iris told her this explicitly on the first day. "The front door is not locked, but if you step outside, Price's people will eventually see you, and we lose the window, we have to move against him. So the door is not locked, but the practical situation is what it is." "That," Sarah said, "is a very careful way to describe being kept somewhere." "Yes," Iris agreed, without apology. Ethan recovered with the focused determination of someone who experienced illness as a personal affront. By the 3rd day, he was walking the hallway of the medical suite with controlled, deliberate steps. By the 6th day, he had relocated himself to the main floor, where he sat at a long table covered in papers and phones and the particular organized chaos of someone managing a large and complicated situation from a kitchen table. He acknowledged Sarah's presence with a nod the first time she came downstairs and poured herself coffee from the machine in the corner. "How's the pain?" she asked. "Manageable. On a scale." "I'm not doing a scale. It's a clinical tool." 4, he said, without looking up from the paper he was reading. "It's a 4. She drank her coffee. He turned a page. "Mara's physiotherapy evaluation is scheduled for Thursday," he said without any preamble. "The team lead is Dr. Anand Mehta. He's the best in Ontario for spinal recovery cases in her age group. He was not available 3 weeks ago. He is available now." Sarah set down her mug. "How? I made a call." "You made a call from a safe house while recovering from a gunshot wound and a 7-hour emergency surgery." "It was one call," he said. "It took 4 minutes." He finally looked up. There was something in his expression that was difficult to name. Not quite guilt, not quite apology, something quieter than both. "She's 17. She has a full recovery ahead of her. She should have the best available." Sarah stood there. Outside the window of the kitchen, a squirrel was doing something determined with the base of a cedar hedge, the ordinary world continuing without her. "Thank you," she said. It came out smaller than she intended. "You spent 7 hours keeping me alive," Ethan said, "with trauma shears and saline and a handwritten chart in a room that isn't on the floor plan. I think we're some distance from even." She found the rhythm of the days slowly. Mornings, coffee, and the clinical check-ins that Ethan submitted to with minimal complaint. Afternoons, the tablet Iris had set up with an encrypted live feed to Mara's room. The same way you watch someone you love from a distance when the distance isn't your choice. She watched Mara do her first physiotherapy session from a chair in North York and felt the specific grief of not being in the room. Evenings were strange. The house had a routine that she gradually mapped. The guards changed at 8, the phones went quiet around 9, and Ethan invariably ended up on the back porch with a glass of something he barely drank, looking at the spruce tree like it had personally wronged him. She started joining him, not intentionally, the first time. She had gone out for air and he was already there, and leaving immediately would have been obvious. But it became a thing that happened. They talked, or didn't, and the specific silence of 2 people who have been through something strange together settled around them comfortably. "Price knows about me," she said one evening, 10 days in. Iris had told her that afternoon, careful and direct. "His people found the nurse rotation records. They know someone from overnight assisted a patient off the camera grid. They don't have your name yet," Ethan said. "Yet." She looked at the spruce tree. "How long does yet last?" "Not long." His voice was even. "We have a location on Price. The board member who gave him access to the hospital network made a mistake yesterday, used a personal device to forward a file. We have a trace. What happens when you find him? He looked at her sideways. He didn't answer, and she hadn't really expected him to. I need to know it ends, she said. I need to know Mara is safe and I can walk back into that hospital and be her sister again instead of a ghost. It ends, he said. I give you my word. The word of a Caruso, she said, and heard the edge in her own voice. Yes, he said. That's exactly what it is. She believed him. She wasn't sure that was sensible, but she believed him. The operation happened on a Thursday. Sarah was in the communications room, a converted bedroom with monitors and a woman named Fen running the feeds. And she watched the thermal imaging and listened to the radio traffic and understood, slowly and in real time, how the world Ethan Caruso lived in actually operated. It was nothing like what she had imagined from the outside. It was quieter, more methodical, more like a very precise and morally complicated logistics problem. Gordon Price was found in a private office above a restaurant in the distillery district. The board member had his passport confiscated and was advised, in terms Sarah gathered were legally deniable but comprehensively clear, that his connection to Price constituted a conflict of interest that would be brought to the attention of the hospital's ethics committee unless he chose to resign. He resigned. Price was taken somewhere. Sarah did not ask where. The camera network access was revoked. The hospital system was cleaned. Every record connecting an unnamed overnight nurse to a gunshot patient was removed from every database Price's people had been able to access. Ethan came back to the house at 4 a.m. Sarah was in the kitchen with the lights on and a pot of tea she had made at 2 and hadn't drunk. He sat down across the table from her and looked at her face. It's done, he said. She exhaled. It came out shaky at the edges. From the breast pocket of his jacket he produced an envelope and slid it across the table. She picked it up and opened it. Inside was a letter on hospital letterhead confirming Mara's full financial coverage through the Caruso Family Medical Foundation, a rehabilitation plan signed by Dr. Anand Mehta, and a second sheet that was a letter of apology from the hospital board for administrative failures in billing and coverage communication. That last one, Ethan said, watching her read, was Iris's idea. She said it was the most honest of the documents. Sarah set the papers down. She looked at him across the kitchen table with its cold cups of tea and the grey pre-dawn light beginning at the window. I can go home, she said. Yes. She sat with that for a moment, everything she had fought for, right there in an envelope. She could be back at Mara's bedside before morning rounds. She could be a person with a name and a known shift schedule, and a life that was only what it looked like. She could take all of this and walk out the front door and never look at the particular quality of careful attention in Ethan Caruso's eyes again. She picked up the envelope. She tapped it against the table once. Then she set it back down, flat, and looked at him. I spent 10 days watching you run a crisis operation from a kitchen table while recovering from surgery, she said. And the thing that kept occurring to me was that nobody in your entire organization knew how to monitor a post-operative patient properly. Fen is checking her blood pressure cuffs wrong. The overnight guard on the medical suite doesn't know how to read a pulse oximeter. You've a functional trauma kit in that room and nobody competent to use it. Ethan was very still. I'm not a ghost, Sarah said. And I'm not a maid, and I'm not a liability, and I'm not someone who needs to be protected from information by being kept in a room. She leaned forward slightly. I'm the person who kept you alive for 7 hours when every other option had failed. I would like to be something other than a secret. Something shifted in Ethan Caruso's face, the careful, calibrated control of it. He looked at her the way she had looked at his chart for 7 hours, trying to determine what was actually true rather than what was easiest to manage. That would complicate things considerably, he said. I know, my father will have opinions. I've handled a Caruso already, she said. I think I can manage another one. A long pause. Outside, the city was beginning its earliest sounds, a truck somewhere, the hiss of distant traffic. The spruce tree in the backyard was holding still. I can't promise you uncomplicated, Ethan said. I didn't ask for uncomplicated. I asked to be something real. She stood up, picked up her cold tea and carried it to the sink. She stood there for a moment with her back to him. I'm going to go see Mara now, and then I'm going to come back. She turned around. Unless you'd prefer I didn't. The answer was in his face before he said anything. The careful man with the careful eyes, who had trusted her in a stairwell with something he had no logical reason to trust her with, and had not once regretted it. Come back, he said. She walked out of the kitchen through the front door, unlocked, always unlocked, and into the thin grey morning, and for the first time in 2 years, the air felt like it belonged to her.